Welcome back to an edition of the official Catchup podcast. I am Ben Grant, your host and compere for the evening. I'm joined as always by Chris. Chris, how you doing?
Yeah, not bad. It's been an alright weekend. You can't complain with Spurs winning their first game in 2026. So,
Shock.
yeah, I watched the game, obviously. It was frustrating. It wasn't the greatest game, but a win's a win there, as they say in football.
Win. Although West Ham did win, so it didn't really make any difference, really.
To be honest, Ben, I think the win was more important. Like, I actually, for some reason, expected West Ham to beat Everton. So, to me, getting over that hurdle of not losing games, and I think that was more important than anything else. So,
for sure. We absolutely take it. We're absolutely delighted to get a result. Deserby's Army are on the way, as the saying goes. But we've got a chance. Well, I think I hope we'll be okay. I think if we can get us playing. I think Xavi Simons looks like he's took a bit of injury and he'll be out for the rest of the season.
Well, no changes there in terms of injuries. Did you see the tackle on Bissouma? Terrible, eh? Yellow card, are you kidding me? 2-footer. But that's it's been the same all season with Spurs. I mean, we can't make up for the fact that we're shite, but when every big decision goes against you as well, there's no chance of winning. I think Solanke got injured in that game today, but of course this isn't the Spurs podcast, so
if you have joined us, you haven't tuned into a new EPL podcast hosted by myself and Chris. This is the official catch-up. We are going to talk about plenty of stuff that's happened across the different leagues. We obviously have the Lone League has completed. We obviously had the big discussion last week about Linlithgow and Clydebank, and that's all done and dusted. Chris has just checked that the big spoon's still there, and it definitely is, so all good on that front. Thing that has came up in the last few days is the team of the season, Chris. Something you are very, very passionate about, certainly, and we've had the public vote for all the positions, and we have our team. So some plenty of good players, Chris. Firstly, someone asked me this the other day, and let's get you to clarify this, Chris. Why is it like a squad and not like an 11?
Well, the listeners' team was always a squad. At the actual official catch-up one, always that big, but I mean, I get to a point where we had the season like we had. I have trouble leaving out certain guys, so what I mean. The season we had, it was like the actual standard to get into the squad was like so high. Like there was people missing out that I probably would have otherwise had in that literally missed out just because they had a few less appearances in the league. Maybe they missed a few games here and there compared to someone else. It was that high a standard. It was probably, with respect to the previous seasons, it was probably one of the better team of the seasons, I would say. I think it was like altogether solid. I mean, some guys picked themselves, Bennett.
Goalies there, to say Cammy Binney, Kelby Mason on start. First year at Clydebank, he was coming in there to compete with Andy Leishman, which for me I think is incredible that there's two goalies of number one standard in probably any team, certainly in the West and probably in the Lone League, in there. So fair play to Owen. Kelby Mason, we know Kelby very well, talented goalkeeper. Cammy Binney, Linlithgow champions, so well worth his place in the team.
Kelby Mason, I think for efficiency, well, obviously he conceded the less goals than every other keeper, so obviously he was a top keeper. Cammy Binney, obviously playing for Linlithgow, he was up there in terms of clean sheets. And Owen, like you mentioned about Andy, I think Andy got injured earlier in the season. Owen sort of stepped up and he finished the season with the most clean sheets out of all the keepers in the league, because he had a foray kind of towards the end where he got like I think 3 or 4 right at the end of the season, so that kind of boosted him up. So yeah, I'm delighted with the top 3. I think the one keeper that you miss out there is probably Ross Connolly, and I could even picked him over the other 3, and I think no one would have complained too much. But certainly they were the 3 for me on the season.
It's a rare sight to see Ross Connolly not in the catch-up team this season when he's been available. He's certainly a goalkeeper we all know of. Has done some great stuff over the years, and surprised. I think I did notice he's leaving at the end of the season, I think.
Yeah, I think he's left Bonnyrigg as far as I'm aware. I know he wasn't playing in the cup final today, so I don't know if he's just left altogether at the now or he was unavailable for today. But yeah, certainly he's moving on from Bonnyrigg.
Interesting to see where he ends up, because he is a top quality goalkeeper, Ross. I think he's West based. Am I right in saying? I think he's West based, so you might see him pop up at a West a Scotland team. That's not me saying I have some sort of exclusive there that Ross Connolly has signed for a West Scotland team, but watch this space and see where he ends up. Looking in defenders, you had Adam Fernie from Cumbernauld Colts, Ewan Gregg and Josh Grigor from Trent, you had Josh Lang from Bonnie Rose, Chris McGowan, David Simon from Clydebank, and Greg Skinner and Cammy Thompson from Linlithgow Rose. Starting off with Adam Fernie, you spoke about him, a few weeks ago, Chris. Really, really good player and had a great season for Colts.
Try and break it down in terms of the fullbacks. Ewan Gregg, Adam Fernie, Cammy Thompson. I do have a sort of preference for my fullbacks, I would say. It's the ones that really get involved in the forward play as well, the ones that set up goals or score goals themselves. And I think that applies to all of the fullbacks I picked. So yeah, they had fantastic seasons. Ewan Gregg. There was a wee bit of confusion because Ewan Bald, the Trinent captain, was in the listeners team. The reason Ewan never got into it, and it's like I said earlier, it was simply down to appearances. I think he had missed maybe about 10 games altogether for the season. Dean Brett, I know he's a bit of a divisive figure. Some people like him, some people don't. I thought he was incredible this season. Again, just missed out for appearances. I mean, if you look at the Trinent team, obviously had Josh Grigor in at centre back. Like, they were solid. Obviously, we've talked about it before. Best defensive record. Do I really need to explain David Simon, Chris McGowan? I don't think I do, really.
I think obviously know both boys really well from Kilwinning. They were great players, and Chris McGowan, I think, got to give him a lot of credit for his comeback. He was East Kilbride. He had a really bad injury where he had, I think, some sort of, I think it was like a hole in his thigh or something like that, or his knee, when he was basically told he couldn't play football again. And he's came back, he's got himself fit and got him in shape. He went to Clydebank, last season roughly, and then has came in and played a full season pretty much at centre half. And I think I actually was speaking to a Clydebank player yesterday, and they were saying that Chris McGowan is one of the best players they've ever played with at this level. So hats off to him. Gow's is a top quality defender at this level of football, and certainly could probably be playing higher if he wanted to. So, and the same for Simon, David Simon. He's a great player. One of those guys that very dependable. We can always rely on him. He had a wee bit of a brain fart at the Linlithgow Rose game when he got sent off for a kind of last man challenge, I think it was. But good players, and then I think Adam Fernie, like we've said, he's one of the best defenders at the Colts for sure, and he's a standout performer in that Colts team. Moving on to the midfield, then you've got Kyle Bell from Broxburn Athletic, Dean Cairns, Nicky Lowe, and Neil McLaughlin from Clydebank, Billy King from Bonnie Rose, Finn Moffat from University of Stirling, and Conor McMillan and Lucas Stenhouse from Linlithgow Rose. So yeah, more great players. I think the ones that stand out for me are obviously going to be the Clydebank players. These are the ones I know of and I've seen plenty of. But Lucas Stenhouse for me, I think is a great player. I've seen him play. I think he was at Boness. Very, very talented player. Obviously, been a mainstay in that Linlithgow Rose team.
Yeah, he got a bit of stick, obviously, because going from Boness last season, I think a lot of people expected him maybe back at Boness, but he signed for Linlithgow. Big rivalry, obviously. So for a player of his sort of age to step up to that, because he could have folded, because I know, let's just say a few Boness fans weren't happy that he made the move to Linlithgow. So no, Lucas Stenhouse is, for a spectator, he's one of the most exciting players to watch in the Lowland League for Boness last year. He was a good player. So I think the other ones, Nicky Lowe again, it's probably the Clydebank ones that I don't really have to explain. Nicky Lowe, everyone knows his quality. He's probably one of the best players to ever be in to play in non-league in terms of his calibre and his technical ability. Dean Cairns, spoke about it in the listeners team, but an absolute engine for that Clydebank side. I guess the one that some people might look at is Kyle Bell, because he maybe doesn't have the stats to back it up in terms of some of these other guys, but he's kind of like a Dean Cairns, where he's pretty much the engine of that Broxburn side. Very, very solid. I'm sure he was in my team last year as well. I was really impressed with him. You probably noticed that Neil McLaughlin had to shift him more back into his midfield role to fit in all the forwards, because, like I say, the standard was so high this season. The standard, the goal scorers and the creators was just absolutely immense this season. Billy King had a good season as well. And there was other guys that just missed out. And it was probably down to appearances. I was really impressed with Harry Wright, Berwick, who was on loan from Stirling Albion. I think he was fantastic. Didn't play as many games as some of the other guys. Obviously, my local team, Ken Beef, there was a few guys that impressed me there, especially in the midfield. But yeah, this season, the standard was ridiculous, Ben.
The thing that impresses me about Dean Cairns is, it's the progression. I seen him play for Rob Roy maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I remember coming down to Buffs Park at midweek one night, and a 2-each draw. And he just, absolutely strolled the game, ultimately, and it was, he's a great player. He moved on into Darvel, wins the league with Darvel, and then Darvel have their situation in terms of the changes of the structure of the club, and opens up an opportunity for the likes of Dean Cairns, David Syme, Andy Leishman, etc. to all move to Clydebank, and these MPs moved. Dean's then taken up at another notch, I would say. He's obviously playing with really good players, but he's definitely an important piece of that jigsaw up at Clydebank, and again can kick on. But again, what is kicking on for some players? I think that's probably a separate discussion. Do players want to go to League Two? Maybe not, because a good opportunity to go and compete with a team like Clydebank. They're a top side, and they're going to be well placed again next season to be challenging and right up there. So these guys are sticking around. Another Nicky Lowe signed a new contract with Clydebank just recently as well. So ideal for them. And obviously you think he lives local. He likes to play and amongst that team, and it's a well drilled outfit. One player I didn't really know of, Chris, was Finn Moffat, University of Stirling. Tell us a bit more about Finn.
Kind of subjective in terms of position. Some guys are midfielder. You could put them in a forward role or a midfield role. He just scored a bunch of goals for Stirling Uni this season. I think I remember Stirling Uni posting out something. I think he had 40 goals in all competitions. So in terms of the stats throughout the team, it's really difficult for some guys to compare to the ones I chose. I mean, you had guys like Alison Jones for Bonnyrigg, who is a fantastic player, obviously, and he was pretty decent on the stats. But yeah, compared to some other guys, it's really hard to put Alison in. And this is what I'm saying. That people are asking the question, why is it more of an international squad? Because how do you pick an 11 or an 18 in a season like that? So I really don't mind. I try not to go any further than that, but it is difficult, and it was almost borderline impossible this season.
And then on the forwards, then Chris, with Errol Douglas from Broxburn, Josh Jack from Cumbernauld Colts, Kieran Mitchell from Bonnet United, Cammy Ross from Bonnyrigg Rose, Keir Sampson from Clydebank, and Lennon Walker from Cali Braves. The Lennon Walker propaganda back for another week, Chris.
Top scorer in the league. I mean, I couldn't leave out the top scorer in the league. I got a few complaints that he wasn't in the listeners' team this season, and like I say every year, clubs that engage with it tend to do well. Clubs that don't. Specifically for the forwards, there was almost 2,000 votes on that. That's how incredibly competitive it was, and people wonder how I can't make my own team this season when it's that competitive for forwards. I mean, if you look at all the guys that were in the forwards, I mean that's your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 top scorers in the league, and most of them on this season, including your cup games and whatever, probably had 20 plus goals. So how do you pick between that? You know what I mean?
It's funny you mentioned about people giving you abuse. Mrs. Grant in the house even said to me the other day, Chris needs to stop biting these people because he's doing his own thing. He's picking the players, and he's obviously it's a public vote in the listeners' team this season. She's like, just leave them to it, because he kept replying, I think, to people on Facebook or something. She's seen it on her timeline, and she was like, just tell that boy to stop. I was like, it was funny because I was like, aye, you're right.
You know what it is, Ben? You know what it is? It's not actually people criticising the team as such. It's just the fact that people, I even said, it's just people not understanding that I don't have any say over that one. It's literally a vote. Like, I'm not deciding the vote, basically. You know what I mean? That's why we do our own team of the season ourselves. But yeah, I literally have no say on who's in that, other than counting the votes and then declaring the winners and maybe writing about them. But yeah, I literally have no say in that. So it's just like when I get comments like, "Oh, why is such and such not in it?" It's like because it's a vote. You can have voted for him. You know what I mean?
I noticed there wasn't a manager in that team though, Chris.
Fuck, I wish you never mentioned that. No, you caught me out there. You caught me out there, because usually I do put a manager in my own team of the season. It would have been incredibly tough to pick between Gordon Hurd, who won the League One Lithgow, a fantastic achievement, and Gordon Moffat, who first season in the league with Clydebank, almost doing what no club's done before, and getting promoted and winning the league. I honestly couldn't pick between them, and I'm not going to lie, I shut out. Yeah, I didn't want to pick it. It's funny that you mentioned it, Ben, because I honestly was expecting people to pick up on that. I'd never done that. Kind of happy that it was you.
Full disclosure, I wasn't calling you out there because I was like missing for reasons. I just genuinely thought you hadn't done it, and I was like, "Oh, you forgot a manager," but I didn't realise there was purpose behind forgetting a manager. But nah, that's fair. I think both Gordons in this case have done an incredible job, and I'm obviously West biased with Moff. I've got a lot of time for Moff. I think he's a great person and a great manager. So we'll split it 50-50.
I should have just put Gordon and just left it at that.
Co-managers, we can be co-managers this season. But yeah, so that's the team of the season. We also have the listeners' team of the season as well. Appreciate the engagement on that as well, and people voting for your favourite players of the season. It's always good to see people recognised for their achievements by the fans. So no, fair play.
Listeners' team of the season. I know a lot of people don't like it because people see it as like the most popular clubs, which is ridiculous because 12 out of 18 clubs got a player in it. It's just about recognition. Personally, it's going to sound a wee bit like kind of weird for me to say this, but I honestly don't care who gets in that. As long as I have something that I can say about them, and for me, like I always say, I keep saying, I say it every year, it's about recognising players for the season they had, and all the boys throughout any team, if they're top, bottom, they all put in an effort. So, like I say, I don't mind who's in it, but obviously I don't want a guy that's maybe played like 10 games and over someone that's played 20. So that's the only rules I have, is obviously with the number of games. But yeah, it's all about recognition, and if I'm doing it next year, I'll still be doing the same, obviously. So
moving across into the East of Scotland, Chris, we'll start with the East of Scotland qualifying cup that took place today. Bonnyrigg were beaten in penalties by Camelon at Volunteer Park of Armadale. Bonnyrigg took the lead during the game, and there was an equaliser right to the death to make it one each, and Camelon became the winners of that qualifying cup. So Bonnyrigg just unfortunate just to miss out, but it sounded like they obviously gave a good account themselves and looked like they were probably well set to win the cup, and just beating, and then obviously with the way the game goes straight to penalties rather than extra time, it's a lottery, and Camelon have come out on top.
Yeah, obviously we mentioned we touched on it a wee bit earlier, but they were missing Ross Connolly, where he's actually left the club now, or whether he had like prior engagements or whatever. But it was an interesting one because it looked like Bonnyrigg had won it late through Josh Lang. Obviously, we mentioned that he had a brilliant season, but David Ferguson from our East Kilbride obviously gets a equaliser right to the death, takes it to pens. I think that was the first penalty shootout since I think 2014 when Whitehouse beat Spartans, and the last final at Volunteer Park was actually between a Lowland League side and a East of Scotland side too. I think Stirling Uni beat Camelon, as we know, had a good side. They still have the chance of potentially winning the East of Scotland Premier Division. So Bonnyrigg now on the Lowland League and now East of Scotland qualifying cups. It's been a promising season. You do feel a wee bit sorry that they've missed out on both occasions, really.
Yeah, also hard season. They've just not been able to get a line. But in this case, as a goal at last minute, and then it's up straight to pen. So they can't be too disheartened, I'd imagine, from that. They'll be able to regroup and rebuild now for the rest of the pre-season and get themselves ready for the Lower League East, as it will be next year. East of Scotland and Premier matches took place on Saturday at Bowness Athletic 2, Hillabeath Hawthorns 0, Dunbar United 4, Newton Grange Star 1, Dundonald Bluebell 0, Whitburn 5, Glenrothes 2, Pennycook 4, Haddington Athletic 3, Downapace 2, Musselburgh 3, St Andrews United 1. First one, Chris, Hillabeath, a defeat, when they're going for the title, like toe-to-toe with Camelon. Camelon now got that game in hand, having not played yesterday. They'll be looking at to trying to kind of capitalise on that drawing points by Hillabeath.
We've kind of hyped up the game a little on Saturday between Hillabeath and Camelon. We've kind of, but now that Hillabeath obviously got defeated on Saturday, it makes it even more interesting if Camelon pick up the 3 points against Sauchie midweek, because they'll be level in points. Hillabeath actually have a wee bit of a goal advantage. I think they're 12 more goals to the good on goal difference than Camelon, but it certainly makes it interesting. And it's like I say, I've mentioned it, or I've used the terms heating up or whatever over the last few weeks. It's certainly heating up now in a lot of the divisions in the East and West now.
The one thing you obviously has changed within the East of Scotland Premier Division is the number of teams that will get promoted. That Linlithgow, confirming they will be in the Lowland League East next season. So there's only going to be, I believe, 3 teams that will go up now.
Yeah, obviously that's a bit of a sickener for the teams that that felt like they might have had an extra chance at it. But the ones that are kind of the top three were probably the ones that you would expect. Like your Hillabeefs, your Camelins, your Gene Fields, and then your Musselburghs kind of just a wee bit behind now. And it could get even worse, obviously, because Edinburgh City could come down as well. So yeah, it's not ideal for any hopefuls, but it is what it is. I mean, compared to the west of Scotland, obviously all the places that are over there, we'll get into that. But yeah, it's a bit of a sickener for the top east of Scotland sides that had aspirations to go into the Lowland League.
Second to fifth are only separated by 2 points at this point in time, so there's still all to play for in terms of with 2-3 games left of the season. Certainly that's one thing I would say about that. Dunny Pace have played in quite well. I think for me, having seen them play early in the season, I didn't think they were all that great. They could beat 4-0 off of us at Buffs Park. That was the day I was on the Ultras documentary on BBC Scotland. All they came down to that match, but it was interesting to see how Dunny Pace do. Obviously, they got beat at the weekend off of Haddington, so they probably could have done again an opportunity to capitalise. They haven't done so. And the pressure becomes a bit more now that they have that. The less positions to talk about in terms of going through. One team did get a result yesterday, Chris, was Musselburgh. They obviously parted ways with the manager a couple of weeks ago. They managed to get a result and keep it pace up the top of the division.
Yeah, it was a good result because St Andrews were kind of boiled midweek. They won the Fife Cup against a really good young Dunfermline Athletic side. There was sort of the senior players that sort of took charge there. Craig Stevenson, Wayne Sproul, obviously Chris Renton, guys that really know the club. Whether they'll get the job on a full-time basis, I'm not sure, but certainly they're interims at the moment. They're well respected within the team. They know the club really well, having been there for many years. So it was a good result, and obviously it keeps kind of pressure towards the top, like you mentioned, because ideally all these clubs want to get into the Lowland League East next season, obviously. So yeah, an important win, especially against a team that was on a bit of a high in St Andrews.
Well, a bit of news, quite bum. Manager Lewis Turner left the club during the week.
Yeah, I think everyone kind of expected Whitburn to be challenging more, I would say. Lewis Turner, I think it was his first sort of job in senior management from being a coach and a player, obviously, in the Lowland League at Broxburn and Gretna and Bonnyrigg, for example. But in terms of the team that Whitburn have, I really did expect them to be a little higher in the league. And I think that's really where the team's kind of let them down a wee bit. Obviously, Lewis, it's a tough job with expectations, obviously. So not to be a wee bit higher was probably disappointing. I think that's why the club made the change, certainly.
We played them in a friendly at the beginning of the season and certainly felt like they were on a very capable side and looked like they're going to be decent, but yeah, hasn't worked out for them at all. And they're old school, I guess, kind of junior club. They'll be well seen as a big team for something that's a decent job for them to go into. So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. Moving on then, Chris, to the first division. Armadale are crowned champions. They have a 10-point cushion now on Thornton Hibs with 3 games to go. So they were officially won the league and will get promoted. Thornton look like they're probably good for that as well in terms of promotion, and probably Preston Athletic being the other one. But I guess it depends on that whole scenario now having changed above. Everything else shuffles down, and there's only going to be potentially 3, potentially 2, depending on, like you say, Edinburgh City. So Blackburn are going to be in with a chance, certainly. Edinburgh South have a game in hand as well, so they are in amongst it. Got a bit of work to do in terms of catching up Preston, but I think there's still plenty to play for. This is what for me makes it exciting, Chris, just in generally across all the divisions, because there's still plenty going on this time of the season. Sometimes you'll be looking at things where there's a champion already decided, but there's still plenty of promotion spots to go for. So it makes it more interesting for everyone across all the divisions, certainly.
Yeah, the East of Scotland First was a really strong division this year. The clubs that you mentioned, obviously, Armadale Thistle kind of been built for a while under Colin Strickland. You kind of expect them to be up there. Obviously, congratulate other guys on winning the league. Preston Athletic, another one that are just a strong sort of tier 7 club, just for the quality of the players that they have and whatnot. And like you say, there's a few clubs that are pressing for promotion there. I think that's the one disappointing thing you've already mentioned, Ben, the fact that there is probably going to be less places, so there is going to be a few clubs that deservedly probably should go up, but won't because of the sort of knock-on effect. As we mentioned, it could get worse, obviously, with Edinburgh City if they come down. So it's a real shame. Not something that can be helped, really.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's just. I think for me, the most disappointing thing about it always the uncertainty. You're going to probably the last couple of games of the season, you're still not knowing what you're playing for. But that's again systematic of the whole restructure, and that's what it is. Moving on then, Chris, to the second division. Coldstream are sitting top on 50 points. West Calder on 49. Oakley United on 45 and Kennewy Star on 43. Coldstream, West Calder, probably close. West Calder do have 3 games in hand over Coldstream at the moment, so they've plenty time to make up a point really in terms of those matches in hand. So with their form, I think they'll be well in there. It's good to see Oakley, Chris, doing pretty well at the top. They're a team that have dropped down in division since the last certainly we've been covering the East of Scotland. I think they've been relegated kind of back to back in the last couple of years, but maybe found a level a bit, and they're certainly they're challenging for that third spot as it stands.
I always want the Fife teams to do well, so my wee Fife bias there, I guess. But times when you look at these leagues, whether would you rather have the points on the board or the games in hand? Certainly for the East of Scotland's second, I think most people, with all respect, are probably expecting West Calder to get the wins there and then go above Coldstream, but not happened yet. So you never know in football, obviously. But I still fancy West Calder to maybe do that. But like I say, I mean, we don't know until it happens. Really, it's the same way, obviously in the West with Talbot, but. We'll see how much they build up and if they can sort of manage the squad, if you will. But maybe if Coldstream had more points on the board or a wee bit further ahead of West Calder, I'd probably fancy them. But I think West Calder have a fantastic side, and I do expect them to maybe pick them there.
Moving on to the third division just quickly, Chris. Hoyk are sitting top with 55, Stonyburn on 50, Edinburgh United on 47 and Newborough on 46. Hoyk looking... got that cushion of points already. They've gone well in there. I think they'll, pretty much get promoted, and it'll just be between, Stonyburn. Well, not Stonyburn can mount the challenge and actually win the league, or Stonyburn maybe go up. Edinburgh United are going to be in amongst it as well. But again, running out of games, I think it's the thing for most teams when you think about the gaps and trying to hope the one drops points and another one can make up the points in the same weekend. So it certainly will be an interesting one to watch out there. But
what you said about Oakley, you could literally say the same about Hoyk, obviously, in terms of a team that's dropped down so many levels, kind of like Vale leaving as well. I mean, Hoyk, it wasn't only a few years ago that they were in the Lowland League, for example. So yeah, they're another one that you're right. They probably found their level, and now they're looking to progress to get back up the levels, if you will. So yeah, I wish them well.
One other bit of news, Chris, coming out of East Scotland was that Peebles Rovers have resigned their membership of the East of Scotland League. They obviously weren't playing this season due to some ground issues and not having the right setup at the ground, but they've taken the decision to actually not pay their fees. They paid their fees, I think, last season to play in the league, and then they were told they weren't allowed to. And I think they've decided that because of the ground situation, they can't get that obviously get that right by the sounds of it. So they've decided they can't do further developments, for example, to improve it to up to standards. So they're basically ultimately trying to find a new home, and they don't have one as it stands. So they've decided to. I think, Chris, Peebles could potentially move to the South of Scotland League. They're not either in that kind of the further south of Edinburgh, for example, where they could certainly it wouldn't be out of the impossible to be playing next season in the South of Scotland. I don't know the ground situation well enough to know can they play the ground they're at in the South of Scotland League, for example. I'm not sure, but it's a shame to see that happen. Obviously, a difficult situation for everyone at the club at Peebles, and hopefully they can find a way to resolve the issues and get back playing.
Expected them to come back, but obviously the way I kind of see that situation is similar to Fort William, which I'm sure we mentioned at the time, but I think it's more about the sort of fencing off of the ground, if you will, for spectators, which is pretty much like almost a rule in every league that it has to be kind of enclosed as such, or the ground has to be enclosed. So yeah, it's disappointing not to see them, but the good thing is they're not folding as a club. It's not like a Bonus Athletic situation. They are going to be looking for alternatives. They're a really good club in terms of what they do with the community. They've got youth groups and whatnot. So all they need is a new ground. All they need is a sort of new home that they've got restrictions like we've spoke more about in terms of the west of Scotland. I would say in terms of the ownership of the ground or whatever, they're kind of restricted by what they can do with it because of either council or private or whatever it is. We've probably mentioned this so many times with clubs, and that's one of the reasons that stops clubs getting their licenses and whatnot because of these restrictions. So I really hope they can resolve it. Wouldn't mind seeing them in the south of Scotland, but I don't know if it happens this year. I'm assuming they might go sort of army for a wee bit, like Upper Annandale, and maybe they can progress from there. And hopefully, we do see them back in the pyramid soon.
I mean, the south of Scotland shout isn't a bad shout. I think obviously, I assume the south of Scotland would have a similar kind of ground requirement. I'm not 100% sure. They maybe were more welcoming of teams who maybe have lesser facilities, for example, because they are in a difficult situation in terms of being able to sustain the league and keep it going because of the teams that are moving. Obviously there's been a situation there with the west of Scotland where they've put any applications into what they call abeyance for a season to allow the south of Scotland to try and sort themselves out in terms of getting more teams in there. So maybe Peebles, I don't know if that's something they've even thought about, but it might be an option for them. Maybe, as you say, maybe next year. It could be a place for them to go. Moving on then, Chris, to the South of Scotland League, we had the Southern Counties Football Association Challenge Cup. Newton Stewart beat Gretna on penalties. Gretna, what's happening? Come on. You had a chance to win a cup against lesser opposition and you're losing penalties. What's going on, Gretna? I was hoping to talk positively about Gretna today. Still can't do it. It's a shame.
A bit of a family affair, obviously. The Zach Service and Jake Service playing against each other. Obviously, Zach for Newton Stewart and Jake, who we've talked about previously at Gretna. So fair play to Zach if he's been giving Jake the big licks or whatever, because Gretna ended last season on a high, winning a trophy or winning a cup, certainly. And I think that's what they were wanting to do. Hey, look, Newton Stewart are no mugs. I mean, midweek they ended Dalbeatty's home record in the league with a 1-0 win. So yeah, I think it speaks to the strength of the South. What I will say is, I mean, even like Dalbeatty, they broke their defensive record that went back to like 1930, shared with Ayr United in the south of Scotland. I think they only conceded 9 goals on the season. So I think Dalbeatty and Newton certainly stronger than some people might expect, and certainly again they'll probably be at the lower bracket, but they're not going to be pushovers. They've proved that. I think
obviously the season standard of the South has been inferior, and it probably is for large portions of the teams in that division. They've come up against teams in the East and the West previously and have lost by considerable margins. So it's more common than not. But Newton Stewart are a good side. They've got some decent players and certainly will be capable enough. I don't think they'll be challenging per se either, but it'll be an interesting watch. And I'm looking forward to seeing the Lone League next year, see how it shapes up, because there'll be a whole kind of freshness and new teams and things like that. That will be something to look forward to for anyone who is a fan of an East or West team, certainly. Moving on then, Chris, to the Scottish Communities Cup semi-finals. Largs Thistle break Buckenhaven Hearts, winning 2-1 on the match today, but it was a 3-2 win in aggregate. I say you'll be absolutely delighted for your favourite team.
Obviously, the big news earlier in the week was that the licences through. So dreams of the Scottish Cup and the Lowland League West next season. Cheekily put out, that's my Lowland League West team of the season sorted for next year. I might do that, even if I decide to take a break, I might come back at the end of the season, just chuck all the Largs players in the team.
But Largs have obviously have guaranteed their position in the Lowland League next season. I don't think it's actually been officially announced or put on online, but looking at the points, they're by 9 points ahead of Glenafton, who are sitting currently in 11th. So with a goal difference of something like 30 goals or something like that. So Largs are up, Johnston Borough are up. We're playing now for 4 positions within the West as well. But Largs, I think we talked about them a bit last week. Ahead of the cup final, this cup semi-final, they'll be delighted to get in a cup final. Obviously, the Communities Cup means a lot to people in Largs, and they'll be buzzing because they've had a great season, and just to get to that final, they were close last year. Having lost out to Johnston Borough, but they'll be delighted. It's a great opportunity. They have a decent support, and there's good people there as well in the club. So, fair play to Largs on that one.
Give the goal scorers a wee bit of a mention, because I know that we We mentioned Will Sewell so much, David McGrath and Lewis Davids. Will apparently was close. He had a few chances in the game and he was good, as we would expect. We need to cool it off. We need to. It's me, certainly, I'm a bit guilty for bigging up Will a wee bit too much and maybe not giving credit to the other Logs boys. So it's a team effort at the end of the day. We mentioned Arnie obviously last week as well, how good of a manager he is as well. So no, I'm delighted for the guys there.
Moving on into the semi-final, it was involving Auchinleck Talbot and Dundee North End. Auchinleck won the first leg 4-0 and they have won today's home match 2-1 with Connor Boyd and Tariq Abed getting the goals. Auchinleck back in a Junior Cup final. A Communities Cup final, I should say, for the first time in a few years, certainly. And they'll be delighted because, again, another team that means so much to the fans and the committee and the players and stuff like that. So, yeah, a fair play. It'll be a good tie. Auchinleck versus Lags at Broadwood will be an absolute classic in terms of the Junior Cup. It'll be I'm sure something they'll shout, oh, why is it at Broadwood? It's usually they shout 2 Ayrshire teams playing, but I think the thing about it is Broadwood is a big stadium in terms of what is available to people these days. You can't just go and play at Rugby Park or Ayr without having to pay decent money, I'd imagine. So Broadwood makes a lot of sense for clubs and certainly involving the Communities Cup, the West, for example, as well. So that'll be an interesting watch. It'll be on BBC Alba as well, I'm sure, at some point to watch. So we'll be able to tune into that, Chris.
It's always an occasion. I think it's always a decent event, and what I like is obviously the BBC Alba coverage. Because it highlights the level quite well, like the earlier rounds of the Scottish Cup, if you will. So specifically talking about Football Manager, whether I keep the Junior Cup as it is and just extinct it on add a Communities Cup, or if I just change the name for it, I'm not decided yet. Because I think the right thing to do is extinct the Junior Cup and then add a new competition called the Communities Cup.
Controversial, Chris.
The Junior Cup has been separated in the Communities Cup from whoever does the Wikipedias. They consider it a new trophy, basically.
A new trophy, that is for sure. Can I just point out, folks, for anyone listening, this is all Chris. I said nothing. Just don't want Pine Bovo to come at me. Those guys in the Catchup are slagging off my Junior Cup.
I'm not slagging it off. I just think in terms of what the trophy used to be, with how the juniors were in terms of your Boness Uniteds, your Auchinlecks and whatever else, right, to what it is now, I essentially see it as a different trophy. Right or wrong, to me it's a different trophy. And I think if I change the name and say that Auchinleck Talbot have won 13 Community Cups, that's not really accurate though, is it? They've won 13 Junior Cups and potentially one Communities Cup. Maybe? I don't know.
I mean, I'm not a champion of the Scottish Communities FA or the SJFA or whoever else, but even for me, Chris, I would think they're one and the same. I think all it is a name change. I don't think I wouldn't see that as a different competition. I don't think anyone who's taken part or following the clubs will see that differently. They're very, very passionate about the Communities Cup or the Junior Cup, whatever you want to call it.
I would be taking Junior out of the name though.
It's an interesting point that you raised, Chris. Let's just be clear that Chris had raised that, set that up or anything. That came out of the blue there for me, actually. That wasn't in the show that Chris wrote an hour ago, certainly. That was, for anyone listening who thinks I've got some sort of agenda against the Scottish Communities FA, nothing to do with me, Gav. It was all Chris. Talking point though, Chris, about the Communities Cup, probably worth moving on to that one just now while we're having that hot topic. I know there's obviously going to be a new setup next season with the Lowland League. There has been some challenges, shall we say, in previous seasons for some clubs to play matches who feature in the Lowland League and want to play in the Junior Cup / Communities Cup. As I understand it, I didn't think the Lowland League have been too receptive of the idea that clubs will play in the Communities Cup next season, and I believe the clubs who want to play in it, certainly from the West, have banded together to try and get some sort of proposal on the table to try and find some leeway in the fixture list to get games played on a Saturday, which will be interesting because I don't think the Lowland League have been helpful. We've seen in the past, Chris, with Boness and Trinent, for example, in previous seasons having challenges trying to get games played. And yeah, what's your take on that one?
We had kind of discussed it, how that would work, because obviously I think in the west of Scotland they are more receptive to the Junior Cup. I think that's a fact. I think people would.
I think obviously there's a massive amount of teams involved in that in the West where the membership has a bit more control over things and can make things happen in terms of changing rules and constitutions and such like. Also, let's not be kidded on, Kenny Young, fixture secretary of the West Scotland Football League, is also the fixture secretary of the Communities Cup. So there's obviously a bit of leeway given, shall we say, to teams and make sure. And for me, I think we talked about it before, it does cause some fixture problems towards the end of the season. And they see the Lowland League. The Lowland League obviously play a lot more midweek games at the start of the season and certainly through the season because everyone's got floodlights and such like. Like I've always said, I'm not its biggest fan. I've always been against it, and I was a club person. My position doesn't really change in terms of as a neutral. I feel like I obviously have still got my allegiances as a fan to Colin and Rangers, but I look at it more maybe objectively a little bit more. And I think if there is going to be some sort of leeway given, then I think the one thing that has to happen is that if you play a Junior Cup match on a Saturday, for example, you must play that league game the midweek, and you have to give up your home game, if you like. So, if, for example, I don't know, let's take, just so I'm not bashing Auchinleck, we'll take Troon as an example, or your beloved Lars. Let's take your beloved Lars, Chris. Lars playing Junior Cup on the Saturday, and we're scheduled to play, I don't know, Cumbernauld Colts on the Saturday that week in the Junior Cup. They should then have to play their midweek game at home to Cumbernauld Colts. And if the game is meant to be away, then it should be reversed and played at home. So Cumbernauld Colts essentially don't lose out on a Saturday fixture. That's the way it should be. I've seen something kind of levelled by a couple of people involved in the kind of junior ranks or the Communities Cup ranks, shall we say. That's what should be happening with the Scottish Cup, the Senior Scottish Cup. Now, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if you're going to treat the Scottish Cup differently, let's do the same with the Communities Cup. That's the way I look at it. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out, Chris, because obviously, the membership, I feel like, of the league, so of the Lowland League, will increase to 32 teams, of which, 8 are probably in favour of the Communities Cup, certainly. I don't know where Coinning stand on it. They're not obviously currently members, but I have heard some rumour and conjecture to say they maybe will return. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, Chris, because I think certainly the Lowland League and Highland League clubs are interested in having some sort of national competition that they don't necessarily want run by the Communities Cup, as I understand it. They want it to be more kind of run by the SFA or run by the leagues. That won't happen next season, but I think maybe 27-28 we could be moving towards a back to national competition.
One of the reasons why I think the Communities Cup will actually not be a Junior Cup anymore, and I know going back to the point earlier about that, I think, as from what I've heard anyway, and I might be wrong, that they will try and get that to be the national trophy. So basically replace the South Challenge Cup, if you will, from what I've heard anyway. But I don't see there being too much in terms of the relationship that I've seen previously with the Lowland and the Junior Cup. Like you mentioned, obviously, Trinent and Bo'ness, who literally played a league game on the Saturday and then had to play a Junior Cup game on the Sunday. It's going to be very interesting. The issue we have with a lot of teams is their memberships. Obviously, you've got like Cumbernauld Colts that literally only play the Lowland League Cup and the South Challenge Cup. They're not a member of the East of Scotland, so they don't play in the East of Scotland qualifying cup like other clubs. They don't play in the South Cup like Gretna.
On the grapevine that Cumbernauld Colts would be interested in playing in the Junior Cup and didn't know they were able to join the Communities Cup. I'm going to get these names mixed up all podcast, but yeah, I have it in good authority that they would have been keen to accept an invite into the Communities Cup last season, but didn't make sense. And obviously, John Doyle and David Gormley have came through the junior ranks. Certainly, Goms is a former Talbot legend, if you like, and John, he's certainly been a manager at a number of teams across the junior ranks in previous seasons. So it wouldn't make sense if they're a club that see the appeal. I think for me, the national competition does make sense, but I just think you've got to do it a better way. I think it needs to be regionalised first and foremost, and or seeded. I think that's the two things that I think have to happen for me. This all in first first round and teams from Stranraer getting drawn against fucking Wick or whatever up north in the first round doesn't make sense because there's not enough money in the early rounds to make it work. So that's why when I had my club hat on, certainly that was something I always felt. I didn't see the benefit of the Communities Cup because I think it's a lot of gambling and a lot of risk in terms of what you could end up with in terms of matches up north or east and come cheaply either in terms of travel and stuff. And it's different when you play the Senior Scottish Cup because you get a travel fund and things like that. Your expenses are pretty much returned to you. The gates are usually pretty decent as well. I think I heard of one team in the west of Scotland, for example, last season going up to up north, and the home team ended up out of pocket because there was some sort of guarantee had to be given to the travelling team, and the home team ended up basically down money or made very little money on the gate in the early rounds and then get knocked out. So yeah, I think there's definitely an appeal for a national competition. Do you play for the Junior Cup potentially? But I think the people at the Communities Cup, association or certainly our Communities Football Association are pretty precious about their competition. So I think that's going to be the stalemate for me. I don't know how we get to a point where we are playing for a competition that is a national competition because I think there's going to be too many egos, too many voices at the table that are going to have different opinions, and we'll just never get there. I think is my concern. So interesting to see what happens next season, certainly because I think the deadline has passed for the change to rules and things like that and constitutions for the Lowland League. I think I've seen something suggest there was going to be some changes to the Lowland League rules. Certainly, I think it was Rule B1 was mentioned. I think we can cover it off probably in a future episode at some point, Chris. But I don't know how the membership that are keen on the Communities Cup can make a change effectively this season. I think it'll be difficult to do that, and I think you'll find that they might have to try and find a way to make it work because ultimately they're going to be a new league with less say. You get 32 teams, potentially 8, maybe 9 keen on the Communities Cup, potentially 10 if we count Cumbernauld Colts. I don't know where Trinent and Bo'ness will be at in terms of their situation. Will they want to play in it again, or will they have they been bitten by that and not be bothered by it? Takes it maybe to 12 or 13 teams that'll be interested, and then after that, Clydebank certainly not going to be involved in that at all. They'll have no time for that, I'm sure. The ex-SPFL clubs that are in there, Albion Rovers, Cowdenbeath, East Stirlingshire, Berwick, don't imagine they'll have much time for it either, personally. And then after that, it's just the kind of the teams that are always been in the Lowland League. Will they have that appeal? I'm not convinced either. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out because I think there is also a passion and a real interest from some clubs there that are keen to play in it, but I just don't see how it works. Just before we move on to the West Scotland, Chris, Tommy Sloan, Auchinleck manager. We've obviously heavily digressed there from Auchinleck on to this topic, but Tommy Sloan, 1,000 games in charge against Renfrew midweek. An incredible achievement from Tucker. Obviously, one of the greats of this level. He's probably the greatest manager of all time when it comes to this level of football, without a shadow of doubt. It gives you strong, Sir Alex vibes in terms of, how long does Tucker, continue at Auchinleck? Not too sure who then replaces him. It'll just be like a weird situation, when he does decide to chuck it. But again, competing for a title, competing for a Junior Cup final, another successful season, regardless of how it all shapes up for Tommy Sloan.
I remember a few seasons ago, we actually thought that Tommy Sloan might actually have left Talbot, and we had the same discussion, who would have replaced him and whatnot. And to get to 1,000 games for a player or a manager is absolutely remarkable. I actually Googled it to see, and I think there's only, in terms of players, I think there's only like 50 players in the whole of world football that have ever got to that many games. So I don't know about managers, but I'm assuming it would be the same. I always say the same about Tucker and Dougie Samuel at Spartans. They must have a spare room just full of trophies. I I know Dougie, for example, he was a successful player as well. He won everything with Whitehall Welfare as a player from my memory. So they must have a spare room in their house full of trophies. Like, because I mentioned Football Manager earlier, but obviously I do the achievements, and you go into Tommy Sloan's achievements, and it's literally just a big massive list. Full page, compared to So at this level, I mean, he's got to be he's got to be the greatest to ever have done it in non-league, with respect to guys that have achieved things. I mean, I know of some managers, way back in like the 80s and the 70s and 50s. I know their names, but in terms of this generation, Tommy Sloan's got to be the best manager in terms of everything he's achieved.
Moving on then, Chris, to the West Scotland Premier Division. Athlone 0, Cumnock 3, Hurlford 1, Drumchapel 3, Johnston Borough 1, B Juniors 1, Coinning 3, Paul 0, Renfrew 3, St Cadoc's 1, Shawsborne Accord 0, Rutherglen Glencairn 2, and Troon 1, Glenafton 1. A few major talking points here, Chris. First one, I would say I think the reverse catch-up curse has maybe taken place. I was very critical of both Drumchapel and Glenafton last week, and since I've spoken, Glenafton got 3 points in the midweek against Hurlford, and then a point against league leaders Troon on Saturday, by the way, which bust my coupon. Now that I'm officially no longer involved at Western Scotland Football Club, I can bet again on the matches, and I had a coupon that involved Troon, Muirkirk, Irvine Meadow, Vale Clyde, Cumnock, and Troon let me down for 140 quid. So I'm not happy with Troon at the moment, I must say. I was expecting them to be a kick in against Glenafton, but obviously having bagged Paul Payton last weekend after the Quinning game, and obviously whoever's in charge, I'm not too sure who's actually taking interim charge at Glenafton, but they have managed to get 4 points in 2 games, which is for Glenafton, who are fighting to be in the Lowland League West next season, it's good points and good results. Yeah, Troon, I think they've dropped a couple of points now. They're obviously trying to keep pace at the top of the division and try and win the title, but having dropped points to Largs last week and then another 2 points dropped to Glenafton, I think they actually grabbed a last minute winner, and it was elite striker Sam Jameson who grabbed the vital goal to get a point. In the end, it was looking like a defeat. So fair play to Glenafton. Troon obviously have guaranteed promotion. Auchinleck have 3 games in hand, so well within their their rights to try and challenge. But Auchinleck do have the games in hand. It's just whether or not Auchinleck can keep pace with the heavy structure, the heavy fixture congestion that they do seem to have, based on their involvement in cups and what have you. But it's certainly one of those that Troon had a great season regardless. They got to a West Cup final on Sunday, and they'll probably have one eye on that as well. They want to win a league, but they also want to win a cup as well. So, interesting to see how that one plays out. We mentioned the reverse catch-up curse, Chris. Drumchapel United getting a result against Hurlford. Hurlford obviously probably already on the beach, I'd imagine, because they haven't got anything to play for. Let's be honest. But Drumchapel, I thought, generally winning 3-4, and they managed to pick up 3 points. So, fair play to Drum. I believe they had an interim manager in Ross Wilson, who was the Blantyre manager, but I think he left before the weekend. And again, don't know who's in charge. I don't really know what's going on in terms of Drumchapel and their plans to appoint a manager. I'm not too sure, but certainly got points anyway, which is a result for them to try and stick around the promotion spots. But yeah, decent result. One other team that got points the weekend, Renfrew, Chris, 3-1 against St Cadoc's. St Cadoc's again, another team probably on the beach in terms of where their minds are. They can't get relegated. They're going to be playing the Premier Division next season anyway. Renfrew, controversially, have now been given an SFA licence. Now, for me, that's not the controversial bit, right? Renfrew getting the licence is fine. No problems with that. However, my issue I have here is that there was a deadline set. I'm not 100% where the deadline came from. I believe it was the SFA, because I think they have to get the ground inspections and all that sort of thing done by the 31st of March. Renfrew didn't have that in place because they had an issue with the manager not having his coaching badges in place. So they did that whole reversey, the whole, what we call it, the heart switcheroo, where they change it round and put the assistant manager in as the manager, and the assistant manager has the badges, therefore they now have the licence, is how I understand it. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because I believe my understanding from the Lowland League is they'll still to review whether or not Renfrew and one other West team will get promoted or not. I think that's still to be decided by the Lowland League. That hasn't been confirmed anywhere. And last I heard that it was certainly up for debate at this point in time, which I think is perfectly fair, because looking at it two ways, from a Kilwinning perspective, I would have been really annoyed if Renfrew got in ahead of Kilwinning, having not had the licence in place by the 31st of March. And the second thing about, when I look at it more objectively, is that Hurlford pulled out the whole thing in terms of getting a licence because he couldn't get floodlights in place by the 31st of March. Now, if Hurlford knew they had another couple of months to get floodlights in place, because they did get their planning permission, end of February or something like that, they'd had the floodlights up, probably quite soon, and then could have got the licence in, maybe May. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Well, have we talked about it the last 3 episodes? We certainly knew it was coming. Most people will probably know this that are involved at the level, but certainly the thing about managers having the appropriate license, that is not new, where like the assistant or someone can be the head coach. They're not doing anything dodgy there, because some clubs do that. The issue I think I've always had with it is the extended deadline, if you will. And it's, again, we said it last week, nothing against Renfrew. I mean, fantastic work that they got their license or are potentially getting it. I mean, we all know how much work goes into it. The issue I have is the same as yours. It's like exactly what you said, Ben, about Hurlford. Had they had an extended period of time like Renfrew did in terms of the deadline, they could have had their license too. So I've said it. I don't know if I said it on the podcast, but you can't have one rule for one and one rule for another based on one thing.
But I think, for me, if you're going to set a deadline, I think you've got to stick to it. I think that's the thing. Where that deadline has came from will be the interesting part, because I think there's a bit of confliction about who set that deadline and where it came from originally. So it's certainly something that will be interesting to see. I think, again, going back to my biased opinion, I think Cohen will be fine. I think they'll, have, done pretty well since Chris Shades came in and took over, and, signed the right players, and, they're winning games of football comfortably, and, solid at the back. So I don't have a concern too much about Cohen. Ended up 9th. I think Cohen will probably do okay, but I think, if you're Hurlford, I think you're upset. If you're Beath, if you're Glenafton, trying to fight for that last spot or the second last spot in the division to be beaten by Renfrew will be pretty sick in terms of how it will play out. But the one thing that bothers me most, Chris, is a lack of clarity on this whole kind of thing. Not just in Renfrew, but in, across the board. I think that's the bit that bothers me more. Linlithgow Rovers, we've seen it with them last week with the lack of grace period from the SPFL. I mean, for me, the Lowland League should be coming out and saying, the stance in terms of who can come in, who can't. I don't think that's right. I think teams with 3 games of the season don't know if they need to finish, 8th, 9th or 10th in the league to get promoted. And yeah, of course, you might say that finishing 10th should never be getting promoted in the first place, but, such is the way the structure is of the league and how it's going to play out, then they have to, play in that way and try and get in those positions, and we don't know, and that's just the bit that bothers me more, is that the uncertainty around it, and it's been like that for months, and we're still, waiting for people to make comment and stuff like that. So yeah, watch this space. We hopefully will have some clarity on that. We're hoping to have some chats at some point with some representatives from the Lowland League, I'm sure, at some point in the near future on this podcast. So maybe get some clarity on that episode. But yeah, it's one of those ones where we'll have to kind of keep watching and just keep doing our thing and seeing what happens. Elsewhere, Chris, one thing I was going to pick up on, Johnston Borough, another drop points from them. Obviously, Murday had left his job last week, the week before. I noticed today, Chris, that Johnston Borough put out an advertisement for a manager, looking for someone to apply for the job. Now, for me, that rings some sort of alarm bells. It tells me 2 things, I think, Chris. One, whoever they were going to go for in the first place hasn't, accepted the job. And also, what sort of state is Johnston Borough in where they've got to advertise for a manager? Johnston Borough can go and get whatever manager they want, I would have thought, in terms of the budget and things like that they have in place. The the fact they've got a licence, they're an attractive proposition for any manager. So it did strike me today as a kind of concerning thing for Johnston-Borough, the fact they are putting out an advertisement for the role that I would have thought would have been filled. There was rumours that Stevie Farrell was going to get the job, or was in for the job, certainly at Johnston-Borough. I assume that's not going to happen based on the fact they're advertising, Chris.
I wouldn't say I'm surprised of it. I've seen a few posts where from clubs that I know have one or two in mind, but to me it could just be a formality that they put out. Maybe fans have asked and said,
yeah.
But I don't read too much into it, Ben. But no. if on your end, if you're right, I mean it is certainly concerning. But to me, I just see that as a sort of formality, a way of keeping fans up to date. Like, we have advertised them, sort of thing.
I would hope not, because I think for me that's a big waste of time for potential managers, out of work or in work or whatever else, to maybe go through an application process, if you like, for them to go for the number one target all along. It just smells to me as if somebody has knocked it back in the last week or two, and certainly be interesting to see how it does, who they do bring in, because I think for me they can go and get whatever manager they want. If they wanted John McEwen at Shotts, who's a really good, talented manager, Stephen Swift at Cumnock, even if they wanted someone like, I don't know, Adam Hopes, who obviously went to Hamilton recently from John Chapel, then they could have went and got these guys, I'm sure, if they were really wanted them. So it just smells to me as if somebody knocked it back and they're on to plan B, if you like, and trying to get to see who applies. And the one thing that also did stand out to me, Chris, was they're looking for someone with the B licence already in place, and for me that I think will rule out a lot of people in terms of this level of football, because there won't be that many managers that will have their B licence, I would have thought, Chris.
You'd be surprised, actually. I think most managers do that do the coaching. They do it. Most of them are up to at least B or certainly C. From what I do, because obviously when I ask managers, like say again going back to FM, but when I ask them what license you have, most of them will say B or whatever. So from my experience, most of them are. There's some guys that might not have coaching licenses, for example, but they aim for the B, because that is, to me, the kind of standard bearer of these levels in terms of what clubs are looking for. But I'm curious, Ben, do you have like some insider knowledge on that or something? Because it's the first I've heard about it. Like
what, the Johnston-Borough thing?
Yeah. Just I'm curious.
I actually don't. I have no skin in the game at all in terms of this one. I saw it and I just was like, obviously they bagged Murday like a couple of weeks ago. Graham Ramage took the team, got a result, dropped points I think midweek, and dropped points at the weekend. So I thought maybe senior players maybe taking charge, and maybe I assumed that Kyle Lafferty would probably be in amongst it, but I don't think he is from what I can tell. But no insider information at all, Chris, in terms of what's going on. I just found it very bizarre, given the status and the ability that Johnston-Borough have to get what they want. That I've heard rumours in the past where Johnston-Borough looking to sign centre half, and they were pretty much money's no object. Whatever you want, you go and get. That was the kind of the message, and it would be the same with the manager. If they want somebody of high calibre from the leagues or from the Lowland League, for example, then I'm sure they could go and get who they wanted. So yeah, I just find it strange, but it'll be interesting to see again who they do get involved in the league. Fairly soon. I'm sure I think the deadline's the 1st of May, which is Friday. So we'll get an understanding of where that comes fairly soon. So then obviously there is one more topic to talk about, Chris, the pyramid playoff, and the kind of strong statement that came out from the Lowland League last week about club licensing and expectations of clubs to have probably bronze license in place, certainly in and around the Lowland League at some point. So we will talk about that in more detail. We have kind of went into more depth on the East of Scotland stuff and some of the South of Scotland stuff this week. So we'll talk about that next week in a classic EastEnders cliffhanger. We will, spend a bit more time on that whole discussion, and of course the West Scotland. We haven't, delved deeper into the West Scotland divisions this week, but we will do certainly next week. See how the The promotion places are hotting up on next week's episode. That pretty much then rounds it up for another edition of the official catch-up. Thanks again for listening and watching. If you do enjoy these episodes, please like, subscribe, give us a review on all your podcast platforms. Like I've always said, this doesn't cost. We don't don't do it for any money. We don't make any profit out of this. We're just here to talk about football because we enjoy it. We believe you guys enjoy it too. There's we've had nearly 1,000 listeners on our last episode, and near enough the same on the previous episodes. So we obviously what we talk about is obviously popular enough that people like it. So if you do enjoy it, hit like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. We'll be back next week with another edition of the official catch up where we will talk about that pyramid playoff and club licensing discussion in a lot more detail next week.